Greetings, and thank you very much, Raphael. So I will be mostly punctual, because I know some of you need to get away, so we're going to be aiming for the 12 noon. So I'm going to take you on a journey to look at where we've come from and where we might be going to. The background or the context for me personally, I'm actually not a lawyer, I'm a social scientist, and my PhD and subsequent research was on innovation and the role of innovation, how new ideas, particularly from universities, came out from universities, were shared, were developed, were applied by business, were adopted by the public. So my own research is about that sort of journey. More specifically, I've drawn on some of the work, a couple of things that I've been writing lately. So Carly and I have been working on a series of very short lectures. So I say very short, they're about 2.5 minutes long. So she and I have been working on those. And also on an introductory book that I've been writing. And again, Carl is working with me on that. And Paulina Semenianik is also an RA with me. So these are the sort of contexts that I'm drawing on. I'm going to suggest that we can see animal protection as a 5-phase process. Phase 1, transition. Paradigm shift. We're looking at the early 19th century, the end of the 18th century, so the 1790s, 1800. Richard Pulteney tried to get a bill passed in the British Parliament against bull baiting because it was cruel and unpleasant. It failed. A lot of MPs felt that it was awful. An MP called Mr. Canning, who then became Prime Minister, said that it was the most absurd bill he'd ever heard. He felt that bull baiting was a vigorous and exciting sport that was healthy and I think gave you some fresh air and things. So that was rejected. Lord Erskine, Lord Chief Justice, 1807, tried to introduce a bill to prevent wanton and malicious cruelty. He felt that, although he recognized the dominion that humans had over animals, drawing on the Bible sources, he also felt that we had a moral duty towards animals. Animals had rights, they should not be treated simply as property, he said. So as an individual, this was an area that interested him. As a barrister, he'd defended Tom Paine, rights man. So, this was an area that interested him. He was working on abolitionism as well. And then, of course, 1822, Martin's Act, prohibiting the wanton and wantonly and cruelly beating horses, mares, oxen, and so on. So this phase 1, I think, is a transition from a situation where animals were property and you could do what you liked. Of course, at the individual level, of course, there were individuals who weren't cruel to their animals. But from a legal point of view, from a cultural point of view, it was something that was not legally prohibited and broadly was not morally regarded as wrong. So we've got a paradigm shift coming over these 20 years, it seems to me. This is phase 1. We've gone from a situation where property could not be interfered with, and you look at some of the debates, that's the sort of things MPs were talking about. They're saying, well, we're interfering with someone's property rights. So we've shifted from there into this paradigm shift and going, no, actually, there are responsibilities. We have obligations towards animals. Admittedly, cruelty, anti-cruelty, but obligations. Second phase, I would call it a settling in phase. Quite a long period. There were laws passed laws in the UK, Switzerland, France, other European countries, laws passed in the US through the 19th century. The RSPCA, as you know, was established mid-19th century. And all through the 19th century and into the 20th century, this settling in was an increasing number of animal anti-cruelty laws around the world, focusing on the situations where there was the potential for cruelty to animals. So this second phase is the idea, I call it a settling in, because what we're seeing is an increasing number, an expansion, if you like, of animal rights throughout the world, but of course still primarily focused on cruelty, anti-cruelty. Phase 3. Phase 3 was another paradigm shift, I think. And it came in the 1960s and 1970s. And there were quite a number of separate threads that seemed to come together around the same time. They were probably feeding into each other, I guess. I'll pick an easy one, Public Understanding. Ruth Harrison, 1964, wrote a book called Animal Machines. Ruth, she was an Englishwoman, she was a Quaker. According to her own, her own writing, someone put a pamphlet through her door, an anti-vivisection activist group put a pamphlet through her door about what was happening, in laboratory testing and the treatment of animals. And she said, I was horrified and I decided to find out more and do something about it. So she went out, she visited lots of factory farms in particular. And she wrote her book. She wrote a book, Animal Machines. Each chapter, I don't know if you've read it, it's still available. It's quite a harsh book to read. She knew what she was doing. She was trying to create change. She contacted Rachel Carson in the US, who had just written a few years before, written Silent Spring. She got her to come and she wrote the introduction. She contacted newspapers and got articles written and got the popular newspapers in the UK to support her campaign, which was essentially that factory farms treat animals in factory farms as machines. They're machines for milk, machines for eggs, machines for meat. So she knew what she was doing and she was very successful at it. She got the UK government all agitated, and of course when a government gets agitated, they set up a commission. And so they decided to set up a commission. I was talking to someone earlier on. There was a little bit of discussion within the relevant ministry, the Agriculture Ministry, about who should be on this commission. And the preferred view was that they get a few of their mates and a few of their friends and a few of their people who could be trusted to write a nice report, and then we could bury it. But for some reason that didn't happen. And instead they appointed Professor Bramble, who was in the University of Bangor, University of Wales in Bangor. He came in and he led the Bramble Committee. They appointed the Bramble Committee a month after Ruth's book came out. So they were responding quickly. They needed a story. And the Bramble Committee's role, their task, was to look at the conditions of animals in factory farms. Now, the Bramble Committee obviously was government, and its role, its obligation, was to see about change, what change should be brought about. Their report, about a year later, was fascinating, because just like Ruth, they were not only saying, yes, conditions are very bad, and they used a lot of data, but they also reflected on the nature of animals and reflected on the nature of farm animals. And what they were saying, what they said in their report, if you get a chance to read it, is animals are not so very different. They have many of the same emotions, outlook, expectations, plans. Yes, they said some of their senses are different for ours. Some of their senses are better than ours. They said animals tend to have a sort of shorter term future perspective than humans. But essentially they said, to all intents and purposes, they are the same. And suffering for a human should be equated largely the same as suffering for a human. So they were introducing something which had been, if you like, pushed away, the idea that animals were different. So what the Bramble Committee did was to bring them in and say, we should see them as very much like us. Suffering for us, suffering for them should be seen as very similar. And the Bramble Committee had a sort of obviously a legal regulatory role. And the reason I mention them is not only because they brought the idea of the nature of animals front and center, but what they also did was to write something which 6 years later, became the 5 Freedoms. So the 5 Freedoms was developed within the Bramble Committee. So so this part of this paradigm story I'm talking about for phase 3, we've got this regulatory shift. There was a mention earlier on of scientific. Yes, scientific change, a different way of looking at animals. We were very lucky 2 years ago to have Professor Frans de Waal as our first annual lecturer, and the primatologist, talking to him afterwards, he and a colleague of ours here at Cambridge in the vet school, both gentlemen of mature years, were saying, when they started out, you don't talk about animals like this. And I was saying there, what do you mean you don't talk about it? They said, well, if you write about animals as though they're smiling or they're happy or they're angry or they're cheerful, you don't write it in an article, because if you do, you're not going to get published. Oh, and if you do, you won't get talked to again. You'll be regarded as strange, as weird, as really not doing the right things. So terminology, descriptions, all of these things were essentially phenotypic. Why is it phenotypic? Because we don't know what's going on inside an animal's head. So therefore, all we can do is look at describe what they're doing. Jane Goodall, I don't know if you've seen the film Jane that came out a few years ago. She was talking about her decision to go and do her research. And basically the supervisor said, well, what for? These animals, they have sex and they fight. That's about it. That's all there is. And so obviously, a lot that follows, this idea of richness, of family, of kinship, of connection, of feelings of suffering, of enjoyment, of fun, all of these things. So the scientific community, this is, again, one of the shifts which I think, which I see in this sort of third phase, this paradigm shift, that now we're seeing animals from all sorts of sources. Primatologists and many, many other scientists seeing animals as different but not so different. And of course, philosophical. Richard has talked about the Oxford group, the work that he did, Peter Singer, the Godloviches, and then later on people like Tom Reagan, and then Gary Francione and abolitionism, and of course more recent researchers, many of whom are in this room. Manisha, Saskia, I don't know where they are. Obviously Justin and my own colleague Raphael. So talking about more recent years, again, people pushing these ideas, creating the idea that animal rights law is sensible, realistic, philosophically sound, juridically sound. So what I'm suggesting is this third phase. At the start, I think there was a paradigm shift. I think what we've seen since then is a settling in. And I think that's what we saw last. Phase 4, paradigm shift again. My sense is that we have moved into phase 4. And I think phase 4 is where animal rights laws are actually becoming real. Saskia talked about this yesterday. That's not too, it's not shifting away from all the fascinating research and important work that's being done. It's adding to it. It's saying, let's take these ideas and let's see how they can be turned into something real. And I suppose because I'm a social scientist, by the way, social scientist is like a scientist, but just not, with not as much data. We're not like real scientists. So I did, and I thought about, well, what's your evidence for the idea in phase 4? And so I picked a few. I just pick a few cases. We all talk about Happy and Carvan and so on. Carvan, 6 years ago. Happy, 6 or 7 years ago. So many of the cases we're reading are very recent. Even something like cetacean community is only, 2003, 4? We've seen a new thread recently with Estrelita and rights of nature. I don't mind whether it's different or separate or can combine with animal rights. It doesn't really matter. It's the same idea, which is, hey, maybe someone should have rights, not just humans. So it's the same. It's a new idea which is contributing. Actual laws. Ojai, Panama, real laws within the last couple of years. More teaching of animal rights law to students. Modesty forbids, but the centre and all of you are helping more and more students. The work that Ava's been doing with the Law Lecturers Network. I think at the last count, was it 500 or 600 students a year are now taking animal rights law throughout the world, and that's continuing to grow. So more teaching, more engagement with animal rights students, academics, researchers, scholars. More people, I think, are coming into the field. I think we're seeing, the point made earlier on by David, we're seeing conceptually different welfare laws coming out, where they're sort of not rights, but they're regarding and having respect for animals. So it's a slightly different, it's not, yeah, I know you own the animal, sorry, you can't do this anymore. It's coming from a different place and saying, well, let's think about the animal. I'm not sure whether a ban on dolphins and dolphinariums is a thin or a thick right, but or is it just a welfare thing? I don't know, but I do know that it's making a difference and it's moving things forward. I think we're seeing a shift away from the welfare rights dichotomy. I think the work done by Gary Francione in the 90s with abolitionism was very worthwhile. I think it was a good idea. It had a good resonance to it. But I think we're getting past that now because of the sort of absolutism of abolitionism. And I think, again, the point made in the earlier discussion, I think there's a reduced public welfare, a public tolerance for poor welfare. So we're seeing those changes. And I think that many of them, although you could classify many of them as, if you like, pure welfare, you could also say, well, actually, this is being driven by concern for the animal, not just a limited regulation. So I think phase 4, I do think we're there now for all the reasons, and I'm sure you can imagine some more as well. But I think we're in phase 4, and I think we've been there for the last few years. What I would suggest is that we now recognize we're in phase 4. We're recognizing that we're in this paradigm shift stage, and therefore take that into account, whether it's in the applicability of research or the ways we view things. I think the fight, if you like, or the process has already begun, and I think we should go with that rather than thinking that animal rights are still out there. No, I think they've come inside now. Phase 5. Not yet. I think phase 5 is phase 5 is settling in. Phase 5 is going to be, I don't know, maybe another 10 years, where we're going to be fully normalizing animal rights law. It'll be a normal thing to provide animals with rights. I think there'll be a wave of laws. We'll see broad ones and narrow ones and constitutional ones and legislative ones. Some of them will be very novel and some of them will be very, very simple. I think, and I think in phase 5, as a settling in, I think the rights, just like welfare in the past, rights will be seen as a realistic, sensible, and worthwhile legal approach. Thank you very much.